And good morning. Thank you for joining us. I am Tamara Scott. You're listening to Truth for Our Time. As we give you news that actually you can use, we give you help when the headlines hit home. But everything we do here is given to you with a perspective, from my point of view, coming from the Bible. I feel like if God expects you to live through it, He's directed you how to do it. Now, the guests we have sometimes are different backgrounds, different worldviews, and I think that's always good as well to have discussion and to have topics. I think today we'll agree very much with the guests that we have on here. A couple of different topics and angles we're going to be talking about. Here we are, it's in the fall. A lot of kids have just gone back to school or they are going back to school. And for parents, this can be a very emotional time of year. It should be. It absolutely should be. I think what we're doing in many cases is the most unnatural thing possible. We're taking and removing a child from its mother. And we'll get into this with our guest and see what they think on this as well. And let me just say, this is not an anti-school message, but let's talk about what really truly is best for the children, where the best learning comes in, and what's best then for our futures as well. Not just what's most convenient, traditional, or what we're used to. And so joining me today is Peter Gray. Peter is an author. The book is called Free to Learn, The Roles of Play and Curiosity as Foundations for Learning. And he talks about unleashing the learning within the children and how they'll be better off, better learners for life, more self-reliant. And I can actually see this when I look back on my own childhood. I can see this. Also joining me in studio is Tom Corey. Tom, thank you for being here in studio. Tom is a retired public school teacher, also a homeschooler, and I would say his role in the public schools was probably a little unorthodox, may even really complement and be in agreement with what I'm hearing Peter talk about in his article as well. As far as some of his unschooling articles. You can find Peter Gray, Gray, on Psychology Today, or you can go to Amazon and look at that book, Free to Learn. So, Peter, thank you for joining me today.
I'm very happy to be here, Tamara.
One, I want to thank you for some of the articles you've written. And again, I'll say to our listeners, they can find those on the blog at Psychology Today, which I had to laugh. I mentioned this last night in a meeting, and some people said, I just don't go to Psychology Today. I just can't think I'd agree with anything on there. And Peter, I think if they read some of your articles, they would very much agree. And we'll get into that later today on some of the things that you're talking about happening to our kids. And now let me say hello to Tom. Thank you for joining me as well, Tom.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And so let's first talk about the article of the dangers of back to school. Peter, first off, how did you ever come about writing this article?
Well, I happened to be in conversation with a woman who works at a children's mental health clinic here in Massachusetts, and she mentioned to me, the school year is starting up again, and we're going to start again to see lots of emergency mental health visits at our clinic. And it clicked with me, when summer vacation ends, mental health problems begin for many children. And so I asked her about it, and she said, our clinic is much less busy. We see many fewer emergency cases in the summer. I asked her if she had data about it, and they hadn't accumulated the data. There was no way for her to put it together. So I did a little systematic survey. I looked used every source I could find to see if there was any children's mental health center that had published data that would show the number of crises that they dealt with as a function of the calendar year. And I found only one case that had actually published that data. This was in an article that I found online, but was not specifically about the relationship between emotional problems in children and the school year. It was really about another topic, about the fact that there had been, over the course of years, a rise in children's emotional crises, and that the clinic was having difficulty handling them all, that wait times were increasing, and so on. But they happened almost almost incidentally happened to publish in this article the data not just by year, but within every year by month on how many mental health admissions there were. And so they published that for the years, if I remember right, between 2000 and 2013. So I looked at every year, and lo and behold, within each of those years, there was a sharp drop in mental health admissions in July and August. Beginning in June, the drop continued, then began to go up in September, and continued to rise during the school year and would peak about May, sort of during the crunch time of the school year. And then it would start to fall again in June and reach its low in July and August. Every single year that same cycle was occurring. And so I averaged the data for the most recent 3 years and published that data and presented a graph of it in a little blog post, and it has generated quite a lot of interest. It seems like an almost obvious thing to do, but apparently nobody's done it before. So although there's a lot of reason why all of us would expect this to occur, I was not the slightest bit surprised by it. It's generated a lot of interest because nobody's looked at it before in quite those terms. Oh, wow, there's at least a doubling of mental health crises during the school year compared to those months when they're home.
And first off, I'm thinking that probably no one took this on because you're kind of going after a sacred cow. It's one thing to question government, but for you to question the public school, I'm guessing that's the first reason no one has even attempted this.
Yeah. Well, I've been in the business of questioning the public school for some time now, and it's very interesting. You're right. It absolutely is a sacred cow. I used to do research that on sort of the binding of certain hormones in the brains of laboratory rodents, and I didn't have any difficulty getting government funding for that kind of research. As soon as I started doing research that was beginning to reveal some of the real problems that occur with kids in public schools and began doing research showing some of the alternatives and how well they work, I could no longer get government grants for it. It's not that anybody said, hey, this is a sacred cow, we can't touch this. But it was just that there was not interest, there was not a stomach for funding that kind of research. So I've been doing this on my own, this kind of research for some time. It's not just about the problems of public school, but also about some of the alternatives and the evidence that some of these alternatives work really, really well. But what's happening recently is people are starting to pay attention. Even the people who weren't previously paying attention are. I think there's beginning to be a shift in the mood where, in one sense, what's happened is the public schools have gone to such extremes in terms of the high-stakes testing, in terms of the demands, not just on children, but on families, where, you can't take a family vacation because even if the child is going to learn a heck of a lot on this vacation, the school isn't going to let that kid take a couple of days off, or they're going to be really hard on you for doing so. Family parents are now kind of responsible for making sure that their kids do all this work, making sure that their kids get up for that school bus at 6 a.m. I mean, it's increasingly a real intrusion, not just on the life of the child, but on the life of the family. So people are beginning to recognize that there's a problem here. And I think that has opened up public interest in these questions. I'm getting requests from normally quite mainstream, magazines and newspapers for articles. Reader's Digest, for example, has published one of my articles and wants to do another one. And so this is beginning to move into the mainstream.
Okay, and so I want to, if I can, Ryan, can I go to break at 10 after? Let's do that. And when we come back, we'll join our American Family Radio audience. I want them to be on part of this conversation because what we're talking about, I think, is incredibly vital To me, it's somewhat obvious. I'm very pleased to hear you talking about the connection with the high stakes testing, because again, you want to talk about a sacred cow in the academic world, and yet we are talking with folks who are self-described liberal, left-leaning Democrats who agree with me, would be considered a conservative Republican. We agree on the dangers of high stakes testing, and now we're even seeing for the boycott of some of those standardized tests in New York and other areas where the Common Core and the assessments have kind of overwhelmed the people, and kids are being forced to take, I can't remember the number of tests that kindergartners and fourth graders are being asked to take each year. So you've hit on something. You give me confirmation we're on the right track here on this station and this show. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to come right back with this. When we come back, we'll be with our American Family Radio audience, and I need to thank our sponsors, Christians for America, for helping make this show possible, helping fund us, keep us on the air. And if you want to come alongside, we'd like to have you partner with us as well. But we'll be right back after these messages. My thanks to a Webcast One Studio. WebcastOneLive.com is how your friends can listen in too. And if you want to hear the archives, they'll be available on Tamara Scott Live on YouTube. We'll be right back after the messages.
Get away from us, you mean old credit card. We don't have any more money. We're in trouble now. Save us! Help! Somebody save us! Somebody help! Help! Save us!
Hi, I'm Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of Des Moines. If your credit card's a little too animated, give us a call.
Hooray! We're saved! Consumer Credit! You're our hero!
Metro Ford's on everywhere. Metro Ford's on everywhere.
See 'em here, see 'em there. You got bad credit? We don't care.
Metro Ford's on everywhere. Metro Ford's on everywhere.
Visit emetroford.com for your guaranteed credit approval. Good credit, bad credit, no credit. Everybody drives with guaranteed credit approval at emetroford.com.
Metro Ford's on everywhere.
Visit emetroford.com today.
Hey, psst. Let me let you in on a little secret. You ready? Always try to do business with people, not places. Especially if you seek honest Christian business people. And when it comes to my car, I really need to trust who's working on it. Now, my family is so blessed. A few years ago, we found a family-owned automobile repair shop that operates as a Christian business also. Open, honest, reliable, trustworthy. It's AMCO on Hickman Road in front of Kmart. And it's a family-owned Christian operating business. This family treats your car as if it was their car. Everything from oil changes to transmission repair and everything in between. So the next time you feel the need to be at peace with your choice of who you can trust with your car, give AMCO on Hickman a chance to serve you. And tell them Max sent.
Restoring hope, open my heart to sing, taking the darkness inside, revealing your light, restoring hope.
And good day. Thank you for joining us. I am Tamara Scott. You're listening to Truth for Our Time, and under the banner of Restoring Hope, my thanks to J. Michael McCoy for sharing his air with us and allowing us half hour of his airtime on American Family Radio. If you're just joining us, let me tell you, you may want to find this archive on Tamara Scott Live on the YouTube channel. It's there for you. My guest is Peter Gray. Peter has written a book called Free to Learn, which I think it talks about unleashing children to the freedom of learning in joyful, playful, happy ways, and how we make them more self-reliant and give them a better learning lesson or routine for life. And I think many of us really could find some positive ideas that we know in our hearts, but we've been so trained by the public school program that we've forgotten what's really helpful for kids. But we're also talking to him about an article he wrote on Psychology Today, the dangers of going back to school for your kids. And so I want to make sure you understand we're not doing this to make anyone feel bad for having your kids in the public schools, but as a parent, I know you want to do what's best for your children. And how can you do what's best if you don't know the dangers that could be happening in the public schools and the better alternatives that might be out there? Also joining me is Tom Corey. Tom is a retired public school teacher from a fairly large school district, and the program he had was quite unique, and actually I think blends very well with what my guest Peter is talking about as well. It was a little unorthodox for a public school program, but he actually had work and worked with the family, the whole family of the student, and it was I think a very positive thing where Tom's probably going to get into this later. He had home visits. That would set me off, and I would not allow a teacher into my home for any reason. But what Tom was doing was a little bit different, and I think it probably was a good program. So I want all of you to know, let's have this as a conversation, like we're having coffee around the table. Feel free to interact with each other, and I think our listeners will benefit from the discussion. So, Peter, thank you again for writing the article in Psychology Today about the dangers of back to school. And for those who are just catching up with us, kids' stress levels increase to the point many need treatments in care facilities during the school year. Is that a fair premise?
That is a fair premise. And of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. People experience various degrees of stress, and it's not all that uncommon that it reaches such a point as to reach a crisis where maybe the child is threatening suicide, and so the parents take the child to this emergency mental health clinic. But there's other data, too. There was a study done a few years ago by a well-known psychologist named Csikszentmihalyi, in which he fitted school children, these were junior high school, middle school, and high school age children, with beepers for a week. And the beeper would go off at random times, and whenever the beeper went off, they were to record where they were, what they were doing, and how happy or unhappy or how stressed they were. And not surprising, this was over 800 kids from 33 different schools in 12 different communities, chosen to be representative of the whole spectrum of American youth. And not surprisingly to me, by far the greatest levels of unhappiness were when the kids were in school. The highest levels of happiness were when they were playing with their friends, home with their friends, or talking with their friends out of school. In the middle was sort of when they were with their parents at dinner or talking with their parents, or they were watching television, or they were by themselves playing a computer game. So isn't that interesting? Least happy in school. We, by law, in theory at least, force children to go to school, and that's the setting where they are the least happy, and that's the setting where we expect them to learn. There's one thing that psychologists have shown over and over and over again in research, but too often haven't made the connection to schools, and that's that we learn best when we're happy.
Right.
We learn best when we're joyful and playful. That's when we can think of new things, when we dare try new ideas, when we think out of the box, when we are not stressed, when we are not just trying to please somebody else, but really are trying to understand something. We do that when we're happy and when we're joyful and when we're and that creates the kind of creative mind that's necessary for new learning. So what a tragedy. Right. What a tragedy that school is an unhappy place. The very place that we send children to learn is an unhappy place.
And I think in some of your other articles, I think you've written some on bullying and how some of those programs really aren't working. But it's not just that kids are being forced to sit at a desk and learn, and that's what makes them unhappy. It's, I think, the stress, the tests that we talked about in our earlier segment, the whole family is being controlled by the public school. Tom, I want you to come in on this conversation. You had a program, if we could kind of quickly bring our listeners up to date, that was, you probably saved a program from going under, and it's more of a unique program. Go ahead and tell our listeners.
Right, that's correct, Tamara. As Peter was talking earlier, when he talked about that the stress levels seemed to go down in the summer, it recalled to me the times when I was teaching. Over the years, I was a 12-month contract teacher. I taught agriculture and horticulture, And ag education in the United States has been around since the 1920s. But part of our requirement those early years are to go out and visit families 2 to 3 times a year. And the first time we went out to visit families, if it's a young student, and I would keep those students usually 4 years in the program, which was another thing that was very unique. So over the course of 4 years, it was more than just being like a coach. It was really being an aid to the parents, because many times the parents would come in to me at conferences and confide in me in some of the disciplines, some of the activities that were going on with their children. And so they wanted me to come alongside that student, and these were high school students, to try and get them to come around a little bit more to them. So the home visits were very unique. They were very interesting from the standpoint that the first time the parents were a little bit standoffish, but after 2 to 3 times and doing this over the course of 4 years, I became part of the family almost. But the thing was, they were allowed to come into the classroom whenever they wanted. We'd even put a couch in the classroom and put on the coffee. And anytime I was going through the classwork, no matter if it was in the with hands-on labs activities, or if it was in the greenhouse, or if it was just lecture in the classroom, the parents were always invited to come in, and I always told them not to call ahead of time, just to walk in. And of course, that was very unorthodox for
Sure
many teachers
is.
to do.
Because now in a public school, not only should you have an appointment, you have to go through the gated area. You're only allowed through one door, much like a prison. You give your ID, and you may be given permission to proceed down the hallway and see the students. So yes, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek there, but it's far different. And again, you develop trust with these parents, which is why they then welcomed you into your home. But I would not, under most circumstances, ever allow a teacher into the home with the attitudes I see with most teachers today and the public school systems today. But Tom and Peter, I think what he's doing in his classroom was a little unconventional, and really more of the unschooling that you talk about in some of your other articles.
Yeah, and it is very interesting to me, and kind of opening up the classroom and making it available to the family. It must take some courage to do that. What you remind me of is when I think back in my own school years, which were a long, long time ago. Some of the schools I went to were in very small towns, and they were small enough towns where the teachers really knew all the families. The teachers knew the parents of all the kids, and they knew all the kids, not just the kids in their own grade. And so they had a sense of where these kids came from as they were growing up, and they had a sense of where they went off to after they left their classroom. And my experience was that those schools were a lot more human, just because we were not numbers. We were not just third graders in the third grade classroom. We were the children of so-and-so, and they knew who we were, and we were people that they would meet at the grocery store and say hi to. And we were much more full-rounded human beings in their eyes, and I think that played a role in how they treated us. And there was also at that time, at least in some of the schools, it depended on the teacher a lot, but at least in some of the schools, a recognition that childhood is a time when you need a lot of physical activity, when you're not going to be sitting in your seats, certainly not more than an hour at a time. I remember one teacher who would organize scavenger hunts throughout the village right during the school day. This was a fifth grade teacher. So there was a lot more freedom for teachers who were creative and really loved kids to respond in very human ways and make use of the fact that they knew kids, and they knew how to create an interesting learning environment. Well, teachers can't do that today.
No.
And they can't do that. No way could a teacher do those kinds of things.
No, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Common Core, Peter, but when the Common Core is implemented, we're hearing that teachers will not have the freedom. They'll be on pace. They'll have to stay with the pace, and the testing scores become ever so important, and the emphasis so great as teacher evaluations are tied to the test. So teachers will lose any freedom.
That's happening more and more, to the extent that many, including I have a sister who was a teacher for many, many years. The school system changed in such a way that she began to feel that she was doing more harm than good, and she finally quit. She resigned. She retired early, even though she didn't retire with full benefits because she was retiring early, but she just came to believe that, and this is a person who, unlike me, is a real believer in school.
Right.
She liked teaching for years, but it got so oppressive that she felt oppressed as well as she felt like what she had to do in the classroom was oppressing the kids. And I'm hearing from more and more idealistic teachers who are leaving the system.
Absolutely. We're seeing it as well. You're talking about the stress level going up for students when they're in the school year. And I want to ask you, we've talked just briefly about the drugging. We hear from parents who are saying their children are being forced to go on Ritalin, or they're being told if the child's not placed on a pharmaceutical drug, they'll not be allowed in the public school classroom. If you both could just give me a quick comment on that.
Well, I've written actually a series of 4 blog posts on that topic for people who want to go to my psychology blog and look for the posts on ADHD and Ritalin. But let me make 2 quick points. The first is, it is an absolute shame on us that we are diagnosing 20% of our boys with ADHD. 20% of boys are getting that diagnosis, and many of them are on powerful stimulant drugs that have effects on the brain that we do not know. We do know from animal studies that they have deleterious long-term effects on the brain. There hasn't been human studies done for obvious reasons. There are something like 7 or 8% of girls who are getting this same diagnosis. Can you believe that? I mean, to say that 20% of boys have a mental disorder because they can't sit in their seats the length of time and do the very boring work that's being required of them. That's basically what leads to the diagnosis in many, many cases. So that is really a shame. Now, the other thing that I did is I did a little survey through my blog. I put out a call for parents who had children who had been in school and had received the diagnosis of ADHD and had been given stimulant drugs, and who made the subsequent decision to take their children out of school and homeschool or unschool, a variety of homeschooling where the child is in charge of their own learning, to either homeschool or unschool their child at home, and to tell me about that experience. What happened? Did the child continue to need the drugs? How did the child do in this situation? And I received responses from somewhat over 30 parents. So I have got responses. And in all but 6 of the cases, the child went off the drug when at home, and the parents reported that the child learned just fine in this context, where the child could study in his or her own ways. Usually it was a him, because most of these are boys, and could focus on things that they were interested in at the time that they were focusing. That learning did not seem to be a problem. In fact, some of them would say that my child doesn't have attention deficit. My child is hyper attentive to the things that he is interested in. So it was not, I wouldn't call this a scientific study, but it was an interesting collection of case studies. And if anybody's interested, you can find that study in my Psychology Today blog and read the quotations from parents. It's quite compelling, I think.
And what is the title on that particular article or study so that parents can find that?
So they can find it. Let me just 1 second.
Okay, and Tom, do you...
I've got experiences of ADHD-labeled kids who switch from conventional schooling to homeschooling or unschooling. That's
yes.
If you could just put that into Google, or you could Google my name, followed by Psychology Today and ADHD, and you'll come to that whole set of articles.
Thank you for writing that, Peter. Tom?
And when I think about that, Tamara, Peter, when you mentioned 20% of the boys are labeled as ADHD, I was at 20% when I was growing up, but I had a powerful stimulant at home, and that was called my dad. And I think that what we have now is the breakdown of the family. And my last school district that I taught in was the largest school district in the state of Iowa. And 65% of those students did not have an intact family. And I saw a lot of information and a lot of attitudes that were developing from that, because these young people, just like you said, had to get up and take care of themselves in the morning and get themselves to school. But I really believe that there's something else that's hiding in the wings that might affect some of this also, as one part of the that I'd like to throw out to you, and that is nutrition. I think that we have some issues with soy, with gluten, and with high fructose corn syrup, and with all the junk foods and all the processed foods that are in our industry that has really changed, because I started teaching in 1970 and I quit in 2007, and I can't believe the number of shots and vaccinations, but also I couldn't believe the diet, how it had changed to where the Quick Trip down at the corner was the place where they picked up their breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen some of those studies, and I think that's yet to be seen. Dr. Ann Blake Tracy is someone I've interviewed in past years, and she talks about the sugar levels. And I've had dentists as well tell me they can tell what students have pop machines in their schools with Dr. Pepper. Or, no, excuse me, not Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew. Mountain Dew creates such a rush, and the sugar, and I won't go into it without the experts here, but I think you raise a very interesting point, Tom. We need to be careful about what we're putting in our kids' bodies, not just nutritionally, but physically, what we're allowing them to take part in, and mentally and academically, what they're being told in the schools and how they're being treated. And Peter, you bring it up, that what these kids are dealing with, the way they're being forced to learn, being told that they need to go on drugs, like they have a shortcoming, when it's a shortcoming on our part by not letting them be the free, natural child that God created them to be, and when they would actually learn more. Are you seeing a correlation with the violence we're now seeing in schools? School just started, and in the first week of school in California, I'm hearing that they stopped a plot from a child planning violence against some staff members in that school. What do you think the correlation is there?
Well, I think, when you look at any situation where people feel captive, where people are in a situation where they don't want to be. Now, this isn't to say that every student in school doesn't want to be there, at least at some conscious level. Many of them will say, I do want to be here. But many students feel like school is sort of a prison. Well, prison is a violent place. Not just because the prisoners were violent people who were put into it, but because the very nature of prison, you've got these people trapped together. You're with people who may not like you, and you can't get away from them. You can't get away from them. And that happens in school. You're trapped with them. So picture the guy or the girl who is picked on, who is different in some way, who is seen as weird, who's seen, and who day after day after day is being in various ways tormented, verbally, maybe also physically, in subtle ways, hidden ways, day after day. This is true for many, many kids in school. It's not the majority of kids, but it's a significant number of kids, and they can't get away from it. The law doesn't allow them to leave school. They may go to reform school if they're truant for days on end. Nobody understands the pain they're in, and at some point they explode. And when they explode, they may kill themselves, or they may kill somebody else. So that's not the whole story of school violence, but that's a tragically often part of it. There was a book written a few years ago. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but I refer to it in my blog post on school bullying that went through a number of case histories, and you just felt so horrid about the way these children were being treated and the fact that they had no out. So I think that this is a problem. And the other thing that happens when you've got an authoritarian structure and you've got sort of more or less constant competition, this creates an authoritarian and a competitive and a clique-like mode among students themselves. The age-segregated nature of schooling also tends to promote competition and reduce the amount of nurturing that occurs. I've done a good deal of research showing that the best way to increase caring among children is to expose them to much younger children. Children who might be even bullies when they're with other children their own age become nurturing when they're with very young children. There's something about very young children, especially babies, that brings out the nurturing qualities in all of us, and especially in teenagers, because in some sense they're at a stage of life when their biology is telling them it's time to start learning about babies and how to take care of babies and be loving towards babies. There was a study done a number of years ago, and it's led to a program called the Roots of Empathy program in Canada, which is beginning to spread elsewhere, where they did this interesting experiment of just bringing a baby into the classroom. I think it was just once a month. And it was the same baby, and the mother would come in with the baby, and the whole class would spend time looking at the baby, talking about the baby, talking to the mother about the baby, sometimes, if the mother allowed it, even holding the baby. And the purpose of this initial purpose of it was, and this was sort of beginning at junior high school age, middle school age, was to so that these young people would realize the responsibility that a baby entails, and they wouldn't be too quick to have babies of their own. They would wait until they're mature enough and responsible enough to do it. But it had an interesting side effect. The teachers reported that not only when the baby was there, but even between baby visits, the kids in their classroom were much nicer to one another than they normally had been. Something about this experience of seeing the baby, talking about the baby, thinking about the baby, led them to be kinder to one another, even those who were former bullies. So now this is being used as a kind of bully prevention procedure in this Roots of Empathy program. There has supposedly been a research study done showing its effectiveness. The last I checked, it hadn't been published yet, so I can't be confident about the data, but it's a fascinating observation and a fascinating experiment, and it fits with some of my own research showing that when you mix ages together, older children become caring towards the younger children and also more caring towards one another.
Peter, I've got to put you on hold. We'll come back after this break. I hope our listeners will stay with us, and you can find it on Tamara Scott Live on YouTube. We'll come back and talk about the bullying a little bit more and the unschooling that might be a relief for some of these children. For those of you listening, I hope you'll consider what is best for your kids. I hope you'll consider not what is just convenient for you, but maybe there's a better alternative out there. Certainly, rather than drugging your kids for simply wanting to be the kids God created them to be, there's got to be a better way. And I think we need to be exploring that as parents, certainly as Christian parents, and ways we can best help the kids, the very creatures God gave us to create. So I am Tamara Scott. My thanks to Christians for America for supporting us. Thank you for listening to us, and you can find us on Tamara Scott Live on YouTube. Be encouraged. Never be complacent.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershide.
I'm administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's gonna be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're gonna do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're going to be listening. They're going to want to know what your challenges are. Then they're going to come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm going to take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
And good day, I am Tamara Scott. Thank you for staying with us in this third segment of Tamara Scott Live with Truth for Our Time. My guest is Peter Gray. Peter has written a book called Free to Learn, and I would like to read it myself, even though my kids are now grown. I think it gives us the freedom as parents to do what we felt in our hearts, the natural thing, and to let our kids have the freedom to explore and to learn in very natural, playful ways. But he also has several articles on Psychology Today of unschooling our kids. The article we were talking about first today was the danger of kids going back to school. And I think it's time that parents start exploring and evaluating what's happening to their kids in the classroom. It blows my mind that you would not go to a mall and take off your most prized possession, being your wedding ring, and hand it to a stranger and say, keep this for me. I'm going to run an errand. But most parents will go to the public school and drop off their most prized possession, the only possession that can go to heaven with them, and leave that child with a stranger they've never met or they've barely laid eyes on, not to mention the other staff in the school that they'll see that day that they have no idea what their beliefs are, how they treat children, not even looked them in the eye, and yet they leave that child in their care. And these kids can't just call you when they want. And I've said this from time and time again, and I'll stand by it. And Peter, I'll be interested maybe to know what you think about this statement. I have no proof for it whatsoever. I don't think kids tell you the thing that frightens them the most. They may discuss things with you, they may share things with you, but I don't think most often kids share the one experience that has really scared them or something they're very much afraid of because they don't know how to articulate it, or oftentimes they're afraid of what you'll think of them because of it, or they just don't want to relive it. So maybe we'll talk about that another time, Peter. But Tom, I want to hear your thoughts on some of this conversation that we've had. Tom Corey is a retired school teacher in the school in one of the largest school districts in Iowa. What did you say, from 1970 to 2007?
Yes. And I do we have 5 children at home now, and I homeschool. And my wife does a good share of the homeschooling, and I guess I'm the local principal now and superintendent, and she's the director of education. But we've used various curriculums, but all the types of curriculums that we've used have allowed, and we homeschool year round. It's something that's very natural to the children and they do their chores, and we live on a farm, so it does make it much more conducive to get outside close to nature to do some of those activities. But we've done some Robinson curriculum, we've done Charlotte Mason, we've done classical conversation, and then we kind of blend a lot of those. But what we see is by the time our children get into the high school age group, that they're best friends with each other, and they have no inhibition about their studies, and also they can go through and work with their parents as well as their grandparents, and they have daily contact with the grandparents. And I think that as it says in Proverbs, the wisdom of gray hair. And we're wanting our children to converse anywhere from an 8-month-old to an 85-year-old. And we also have done some end-of-life care for some relatives and friends where our children have been involved, because this is true life in its best.
And would you say, with your experience in the public school, was poverty more of an issue or the broken home?
The broken home was the biggest issue to start with, but according to what Peter said to begin with, when he said he went to smaller schools, that is exactly where I started teaching back in 1970, was into small school districts. And then as time went along, I kept going to larger districts, and then the Lord led me to the largest district in the state of Iowa to teach inner city kids, where 65% of those families were broken, where there was only one parent, and many times the parents were working when the student got home from school, or they were working before they went to school. So it was one of those things that was very dysfunctional. And also there was no guidance from the young people about finances, about how to take care of bills, how to prepare meals. Everything was always fast food, or it was something that was just they would go out and get a part-time job just to take care of maybe the gas they needed for that day.
Peter, we've talked a little bit about the bullying programs. Do bullying programs work?
Well, this one apparently works, although I'm still waiting to see the data. There have been many other bullying programs tried. They tend to be, in fact, now the state of Massachusetts, my home state here, now has a law that every school has to have some sort of bullying program. When at the time that this law was being discussed in the legislature here, I did a little research to look at, well, what studies have been done on bullying programs? Do they work or do they not work? And I found two major reviews of such studies, both of which concluded that there's no evidence that they work. There's some evidence that they work for a very short period of time, at the time when everybody's concerned about it, when everybody's first starting it. But then it quickly kind of becomes something that everybody does, and it just becomes sort of words and programs, and it doesn't work. Part of the problem, in Massachusetts now, you have to report, by law, no matter what your position is in the school, whether you're working in the lunchroom or whether you're a bus driver or whether you're a teacher or a principal, by law you have to report every instance of bullying that you see. And the problem with that is that how do you identify something as bullying? The kids know when it's bullying. The person who's bullied knows when it's bullying. But kids will tease one another. They'll call one another names, and sometimes it's just in fun. And I actually have written an article saying that some of that can be constructive. It's one way of bonding with one another is this kind of teasing, and it's one way of sort of making us humble, knocking us down a peg or two when we get a little too high and mighty, this kind of teasing. Well, somebody who just observes that, who doesn't really know the kids, doesn't really know if this is bullying or not bullying. And so the end result of it is it's just not an enforceable kind of law. It doesn't seem to work. I think that the way that you're going to do away with bullying is by fundamentally changing the structure of schools. I've been studying for a long time a school called the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts, which is a democratically run school. It's a school in which all the students who range in age from 4 to on through high school age, they make all the school rules. They have a voice in the school rules. So if there are rules about what defines bullying. Basically, bullying there is defined as, if I do something to you, whatever it is, whether I'm calling you a name or poking you or whatever it is, and you tell me in a serious tone of voice, stop it, I don't like this, and you tell me that twice, and I continue to do it, that is bullying. So that's a kind of simple, easy definition of bullying. And this is what the kids came up with. This is a good definition of it. Well, this is a rule that they made themselves. And they enforce the rule through the judicial committee that they've established. Now, when you set up a democratic situation, so the rules aren't imposed from the outside, but the rules are created through careful discussion And even 4-year-olds, believe it or not, can understand these arguments and take part in them. And when they're enforced by a jury of your peers, the other kids, then kids take these rules much more seriously, and they get in debates about it. I had a graduate student who spent hundreds of hours at this particular school doing his research, and he wasn't researching bullying, but he told me the most amazing thing that I observed there is there was no bullying. The kids just all got along really well with one another. Well, I don't think it's because they're biologically different kids than someplace else. I think it's because the school is democratically run. The rules are made by the kids, enforced by the kids. They feel responsible for them. They feel proud of being in this school. And because it's age mixed, because there's little kids and big kids. And as I said before, people become nicer when there's little kids around, partly because they want to be models for the little kids, partly because they're just sort of ashamed of being bad and being observed by smaller kids. Amazingly, smaller kids are more effective than adults are in getting teenagers to shape up.
Okay.
I think this is an excellent model. Now, I'm not sure that it can be exported in any easy way into the public schools, but if we are willing to turn schools upside down, create entirely different models of schools, I know that we can create schools where bullying doesn't exist.
And I think I have read a book, I can't think of the name right now, that bullying programs don't work, talking about peer-to-peer victimization actually going and increasing when you have these programs and you continually put them in front of the kids. I think I read the study too. I thought it was out of New Zealand possibly, where the kids made up their own rules on the playground and the bullying decreased. So I think you're onto something there.
There was a study there too. That was a different kind of study, but that's right. On the playground, that was a study sort of specifically playground bullying, right?
Yeah. So I think we're on to something there as well. But we've seen that in Iowa as we've battled bullying bills this last legislative session. Bullying bills don't help. Tom, I think you'll agree with me on this. You have to change the heart. The golden rule, I think, is a great place to start. Treating others as you want to be treated, and just having respect for other people's opinions and who they are, and each being a special creature in Christ.
When we think about the wisdom, of Proverbs, where it talks about training up a child, you start that at an early age. And if you start training a child at a young age, let's say when they're 4 years old, if you're taking care of discipline and taking care of loving them, you won't have to have outside authority come in when they're 14 years old. And also, I think in Deuteronomy, there's so much value there that we are to do this diligently. We are to train them. We are to teach them when they rise up, when they lie down, when they will go along the way. And I think there's biblical reasons for education.
Absolutely. Now, Peter, we've talked about your articles on unschooling, and I would invite people to go and find those and look at them. But I had a question raised last night by someone in the public schools, and the attitude was someone without a high school degree should not be allowed to homeschool their children. Do you think that someone without a high school degree is capable of homeschooling their children? I know I think they absolutely are.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, a high school degree doesn't really mean very much. There are a lot of people who have high school degrees who don't know anything, and there are a lot of people who don't have high school degrees who do. The main thing about unschooling your children is, and I think in a certain sense, as Tom has said it, that the main thing is that you care about your children, you love your children, you support your children, you help your children. You don't have to know everything to homeschool your children. Knowledge is at your fingertips these days. A few clicks on the computer and you can find anything you know. Children can learn what they want to know through the computer. There's lots of sources for learning. So it's not what you as the parent know in terms of curriculum that's important. It's that you are sensitive to your child, you're capable of responding to your child's needs. You don't necessarily know the answers to your child's questions, but you know how to help your child find those answers. Those are the key things. Unschooling, it's interesting. This study that I did was of 75 grown unschoolers, people who, this is a version of homeschooling where there's no imposed curriculum. It really defies our view of education. Many people just can't imagine that this could work, where children really are learning through life and they're and they are devising their own curriculum. They're learning in the same natural way that kids learn before they ever start school. But as they go on and become older, their interests expand. They find new ways of learning, new ways of exploring. Their parents are one source, but by no means the only source of knowledge to them. And so this was a study of 75 people who took this route to education, how they performed in college if they chose to go on to college, what kinds of careers they've gone on to, whether they had any regrets about taking this route to education. Only only two of them really had regrets about it, and those were people who really grew up in somewhat dysfunctional homes, and it was really more of a regret about being somewhat trapped in a dysfunctional home. So if you have a dysfunctional home, you're not going to want to homeschool or unschool your child. If you have a dysfunctional home, you better figure out some way to solve that problem, because whether your child is home or at school, your child is going to have difficulty. So basically, this worked for all of the people who responded to our survey. They had gone on to, here's a remarkable phenomenon. And I observed the same thing in my study of graduates of Sudbury Valley School, because that's a school where children are in charge of their own life. You can, and I've seen this over and over and over again, a kid who has never in any formal way studied in a way that we think of as academic studying, never read a textbook, never taken a test, at some point, maybe at 17 or so, decides that they want to go, they have an interest in some kind of career that's going to require college. So they figure out what it is they need to learn in order to do well on the college admission tests. Or they maybe take some community college courses, and they do well in those. They figure out how to do well in those. And then they go on to a competitive college. And they can do that very, very quickly. I mean, they haven't grown up in a closet. They've developed very facile minds. They've been talking a lot. They have a big vocabulary. They've been doing all kinds of interesting things. They know how to think. They don't have any difficulty in a very short period of time, and partly because they're self-motivated, to learn the math that they need to learn to do well in the math SAT, if they're taking the SAT, or the ACT, if that's the test they're taking. So this view that you've got to go step by step in this tedious, progressive manner that we see in school is simply defied by the experience of especially of unschoolers, but generally of homeschoolers in general, who very rarely do that full kind of tedious curriculum.
Tom?
And it's also defined by students in these democratic schools that I've been studying.
Tom, we just have a couple minutes left. What are your thoughts on the parent? Because many parents say, I'd love to homeschool, but we don't get along that well, or I'd kill my kids, or there's no way I can homeschool my kids. What would you say to parents in a couple minutes?
I think on the homeschooling part of it, it's a growth process. And again, what Peter said, you don't have to have a degree to do this. You have to have the will, you have to have the desire, and you have to have the love for your children. And you will find out together that you will be able to come up with a lot of different activities, but also there are support groups out there of parents working with parents that have come up with ideas for curriculum and all types of other activities that really make it that is much better. But I think probably you think about attitudes, and I think Vince Lombardi probably had a quote one time, I think, that said that winning isn't everything, or the winning is everything, that winning is a habit. And he said also, unfortunately, so is losing. And I think you could even look at that as you could just substitute the words winning and losing and put in education or homeschooling or whatever else. You have to develop a positive attitude, have a developed will to want to really work with your children.
Well, I thank you both for joining me today on this program. Peter Gray has been one of my guests. Peter Gray has the book Free to Learn, which I think is a good idea for all of us to check out. But he has several articles. I'm not saying you're going to agree with all of it. Heavens, if you have a spouse, I don't think you probably agree with your spouse 100% of the time on 100% of the issues. But I think you will find many of them interesting and worthy of reading. And Tom Corey has been my guest as well. Tom is a retired school teacher from 1970 to 2007. Great experience in taking a program that was ultimately going to be removed if Tom couldn't turn it around. And with some good discipline, being honest and real with parents, working with parents with their students, not against them, he was able not only to turn that program around, but to give these students hope and value in what they were doing and in the ways that they were learning that I think complement and are exactly what Peter's talking about in his book, Unschooling, in his articles about unschooling. As parents, you are challenged to raise your children. You are to be their advocates. That doesn't mean you fill out the registration forms and get them to the school on time. That means you do what is best for them. You are responsible for them and to them. And there's nothing that you are called to do that God won't help you or equip you to do in their best interest if you ask. So be encouraged and never be complacent.